Good day, everyone. I am Ian Dave A. Ohario, a base criminology student of Norso under Ma'am Jill Rose Ador. So, we are here to discuss the institutional correction. So, the topic to be discussed are first, the history of prison, Sing Sing Prison, Auburn System, Pennsylvania System, 5 deployments of prisoners, forms of punishment. Next is the Age of Enlightenment, personalities behind correctional institutions, Cesar Vicaria, Marquess of Vicaria Bonacea, Cesar Lombroso, William the Conqueror, Enrico Ferri, and Clifford Shaw. So first, let us discuss about the history of prisons. So prisons were often used as temporary stopgap before sentencing to death or life slavery. So before, the rule of the prison cells are to be used as temporary stock of prisoners for death sentence or life of slavery. But today, prisons were started morphing into correctional facilities that implementing the concept of rehabilitation and reform of prisoners. Today, the prisoners are being treated well in order to be released in the community again. Prisons were often used for holding political prisoners, enemies of the state, and prisoners of war. So, if war and conflict happened, so the enemies of the state are being stuck in the prison cells. Sing Sing Prison. Sing Sing Prison has a maximum security level facility for males. So, Sing Sing prisons are focused on male convicts. In 1825, $20,100 purchased a 100-hectare site. So, in 1825, they purchased a 130-hectare site with amounting $20,100. So, what they do with criminals? They do to the prisoners in Sing Sing prison, they use them as a marble quarry. Each cell was 7 feet deep, 3 feet 3 inches wide, and 6 feet 7 inches high. So that cell is high enough for the prisoners. So it is originally known as Mount Pleasant Prison and located in Ossining, New York. It is built on November 26, 1828, and it is usually known as the oldest penal institution in the United States. Next, who is the first warden of the Sing Sing prison cell? So the first warden of the Sing Sing prison cell was Captain Elam Lins. So who is Captain Elam Lins? Captain Elam Lins is the warden of New York Auburn's prison and the first warden of Sing Sing. Directed the first 100 Sing Sing inmates to build the edifices from marble stones quarried nearby. So, the one who told the prisoners to build the edifices by marbles is Captain Elam Lin. So, had searched hundreds of miles for an ideal new prison location in May 1824. Captain Lins found his spot in Mount Pleasant, so that's why it is called Mount Pleasant Prison. So the name Sing Sing was taken from the name of the local village nearby. Sing Sing immediately soon began accepting women in 1837 but ended 40 years later. So normally, Sing Sing prison cell only accepts male convicts and prisoners, but in 1837 they began to accept women prisoners, but ended 40 years later. So convicts receive a Bible walk only in lockstep and so no visitors. So that prison cell was no visitors allowed and they only received Bibles in lockstep. Rations included 2 eggs per year and nearly no fish produce. So the rations of the prisoners are only 2 eggs per year and no fresh produce. So it is so annoying prison cell. Prisoners work 10 hours shifts isolated in the local quarries, mining marble that would eventually form City Hall in Albany, Grace Church in New York City, and Calvary Baptist Church in Ossining. Others convicts produce everything from boots to barrels. So the prisoners are tasked to mine marbles in order to build city halls and any other infrastructures in New York. The prison population rose in the mid-19th century, resulting in more construction. The four-story complex was soon 6 stories, and the prison eventually housed more than 1,600 inmates. Because most of the early convicted criminals traveled by boat to Sing Sing, the phrase "up the river" came to mean going in prison. So, in mid-19th century, Sing Sing prison has more prisoners aboard in there. So they needed more construction of infrastructure in order to make the inmates clear. Linz resigned as a warden of Sing Sing in 1830 and returned to Auburn in 1838. He was asked to leave but prison in a year later after the death of a prisoner who was punished severely for feigning illness. Despite this record, Sing Sing rehired Linz in 1843. Accidentally, Captain Linz has resigned as a warden in 1830 because of a prisoner died in the year later, but in 1843 Sing Sing rehired Captain Linz again. While Linz was warden, inmates were expected to refrain from making noise, which included talking. So Captain Linz is strict warden, so he don't want any noises, so the prisoners don't talk to each other. The silent system was abolished at the end of the 19th century, but it was the silent system that Captain Linz make was abolished in 19th century. In 1819, where electric chair was introduced, wherein Sing Sing became notorious for its execution. Although the electric chair was developed at neighboring Auburn, almost all executions within the state were carried out at Sing Sing until 1963. The infamous death chair was later moved to Green Haven Prison. So in 1819, electric chair was introduced. So the first who used that electric chair was the Sing Sing prisons. It is called notorious for their executions. Alexis de Tocqueville, most notable visitor of the Sing Sing prison cell. So who is Alexis de Tocqueville? Alexis de Tocqueville is the author of Democracy in America, one of the most influential books of the 19th century. So why Alexis de Tocqueville go in that prison cell? It is because the French government sent him and Gustave de Beaumont to the United States in 1831 to gather information about the American penal system. So, Alexis de Tocqueville is a French citizen, but the French government sent him and Gustave de Beaumont to the Sing Sing prison cell in order to gather more infos about the penal system of the United States. They traveled 9 months by steamboats, stagecoach, or on horseback and in canoes visiting America's penitentiaries. They gather more information in almost all of America's penitentiaries. So Democracy in America, it is the very notable book of Mr. Tocqueville. So Tocqueville believed that equality was the great political and social idea of his era, and he thought that the United States offered the most advanced example of equality in action. So, in that book, it is stated there that political and social idea of his era, and it is the most that equality is the most essential to that. So, then, he also noted the irony of the freedom-loving nations' treatment of Native Americans and its embrace of slavery. He also write in that book the slavery that happened in America. Reformer Thomas Mott Osborne developed his penology theories while voluntarily incarcerated for a year at Auburn, served as warden from 1914, 1915, and 1916. So, Thomas Mott Osborne is also a prisoner of the Auburn but eventually he became the warden in 1914, 1915 to 1916. He developed his penological theories while inside the jail. So his immediate sweeping changes were assailed and he resigned under intense political pressure. So that's why he only served as a warden by 3 years because of intense political pressure. Because of his legal struggles, Osborne stepped down as warden in 1915. The charges, however, were dismissed and Osborne resumed his post at Sing Sing in 1916 only to resign later that year. Osborne wrote many books on penology and founded a national society for dissemination of penal information. Reformer Thomas Mott Osborne has many books that are written about penology and the information he gathered in that penal state. In 1913, he became chairman of the New York State Commission in Prison Reform Prison, emphasized rehabilitation and self-management for the incarcerated, so to promote human treatment. So, the first person who promoted human treatment and rehabilitation and self-management was reformer Thomas Mott Osborne. So he is the founder of that, and he became a chairman in New York in 1913. Right. So this is Sing Sing prison, as you can see in the picture. Louis Edward Lewis served as warden from 1920 to 1941. Notably, improved the living conditions, required all inmates to wear the same kind of uniform. Reform was clearly his first priority. Viewed the death penalty as a useless deterrent used for to teach discipline. So the first person who told the inmates to wear the same kind of uniform was Sir Louis Edward Lewis. So he disregarded death penalty as a punishment and used sports to teach discipline in the incarcerated persons in the jail. So reform was clearly his first priority. Thomas Edison, America's greatest inventor, he developed many devices in fields such as electric power generation, invented the first electrical chair to show how dangerous. So the inventor of the electric chair was Sir Thomas Edison. And he developed many devices in fields about the electric power generation. So according to the article, he is one of the America's greatest inventor. New York Governor Daniel B. Hill legalized the electric chair to humanize execution by the 20th century. So the one who legalized electric chair as a punishment of and execution was the New York Governor Daniel B. Hill in 20th century. Warden Thomas McCormack oversaw the first baseball game in 1914. The facility saw 10 different wardens from 19,000 to 1919. Rebellious inmates and crumbling infrastructure weighed heavily. So, the first warden that oversaw first baseball game in 1914 was Warden Thomas McCormack. He also used sports as a teach of discipline in the incarcerated persons in the jail. Today, Sing Sing holds 1,725 inmates and has 819 employees. Another 2,000 visitors come to the facility each month. So, as of today, Sing Sing holds approximately 1,725 inmates there and has 819 employees. So, it is the Sing Sing prison has wide place. The Sing Sing prison has a wide space for the incarcerated person as of today. Recent attempt to close the doors of Sing Sing forever. Also, they attempt to close the doors of Sing Sing prison, but eventually it does not happen. Several state and local lawmakers, together with thousands of residents, asked New York governor to close the maximum security facility and to relocate the 1,725 current inmates. Next is Auburn system, also known as the silent system, is a penal method of the 19th century in which prisons work during the day and were kept in solitary confinement at night with enforced silence at all times. So, Auburn system is the first silent system in all prisons. Involved reforming inmates and profiting from their labor. Was meant to rehabilitate the prisoners through the basis of discipline and hard work, force them to dress in stereotypical prison uniform, keeping inmates silent, make them more obedient, implemented many punishment, also profited from charging people for taking tours of the prison. So this system is so harsh and it involves many punishment and for the incarcerated persons, and also it is called silent system because no one has able to talk inside or out in that system. But the incarcerated person in that system was so obedient and more disciplined. Auburn State Prison, located in Auburn, New York, opened in 1816, became the model for prisons throughout the United States. Designed to keep convicts separate, industry, obedience, and silence. The system owes many of its attributes at Pennsylvania system. So, Auburn system has many attributes gained from Pennsylvania system. It has the industry, obedience, and silence because of the silent system implemented in that prison cell, and became the model for prisons throughout the whole United States. It is also located in New York. Each convict was assigned a prison number. Movement to and from the workshop was performed in a regimented manner, known as the lockstep. By the early 1820s, the Auburn flood had resulted in construction of tiny individual cells. Same year, Auburn Prison adopted a new method known as the Auburn system. So, each incarcerated person has assigned prison number. For example, prisoner 1 has the number of prison cell number 1 and 2 and so on. Then, movement to and from the workshop was performed in a regimented manner. So, the lockstep, it is the lockstep. So, by the early 1820s, the Auburn plan had resulted in construction of tiny individual cells. In 1820s, they built more tiny construction individual cells because of more incarcerated convict persons. On 1821 to 1825, the prison system briefly implemented a three-level classification system. First is the minor offenders, labored in workshop during the day and returned to separate cells at night. So they implemented three-level classifications. It first is the minor offenders. When minor offenders are used to work at day and return to their cells at night. The next, serious offenders alternated their days between solitary confinement and congregate work. So serious offenders are used to work at days with between solitary confinement of their time and congregate work. They work hard because of their serious offense. Next is the most hardened criminals placed in solitary confinement without work. They don't work, but they are confined in a very solitary room or prison cell. A Boston clergyman who visited Auburn in 1826, the Reverend Louis Dwight, and his associate from the Boston Prison Discipline Society, pronounced Auburn a noble institution. The institution seems so successful that in 1825, Linz was assigned to build a similar prison in Sing Sing. So this system and prison cell was so successful, that's why Captain Linz was tasked to make similar prison in Sing Sing cell because of the many notable and noble institution of Auburn system. To ensure that inmates did not corrupt one another, Britain's successor Elam Linz informs a quasi-military routine of absolute silence, strict discipline, and economic productivity. So it is where silent system, they don't usually talk, no noise, and obedience, and very discipline. Letters were banned and the chaplain was the only occasional visitor. Although the prison system is seen today as inhuman and extremely brutal, in that time people considered it as a progress from long-term imprisonment and death penalties for many offenses, both big or small. So next is the Pennsylvania system. So history of the Pennsylvania system. Pennsylvania system are originating in 1682 under the leadership of William Penn. So that's why it is called Pennsylvania, because of the last name of Mr. William Penn. It was comes from that. So the first state prison system suggests the replacement of torture and mutilation as punishment for crimes with hard labor in houses of correction. So it is the first system that makes and replace torture punishment for hard labor. So from tortures and mutilation to labor. So the incarcerated persons are usually tortured, but in Pennsylvania system they work in the houses of the correction. Penn's institutions were not systematically executed when his penal code of 1682 was repealed. Inmates were placed on public display as they cleaned city streets. Work was not to be for punishment but to be urged as an agent of reform. So torture was demolished and abolished in this system, and the convicts are used to work in streets, houses, and clean city streets. A separate system where the prisoners would have time to reflect on their crimes and become reformed. So it is where convicts are used to work and reflect from their crimes and become reformed in order to release in the society again. In 1827, the Western State Penitentiary was built in Allegheny County. In 1829, the Eastern State Penitentiary was built outside Philadelphia. So, there are two penitentiary, the West and the East. It is the West are built in 1827, while the East are built in 1829. So, Western State Penitentiaries. So, what are the Western State Penitentiaries? So, prison labor failed due to the small cells. Conducted in common congregate gate workshop, developed a diversified industrial program. So, the prison labor was failed because of the small cells. So, the convicts can't work well because of the small cells in that penitentiary. But they conducted in common congregate workshops and developed a diversified industrial program. Even though the first labor failed, but they developed a more diversified industrial program in order the convicts can do their jobs. So, Eastern penitentiaries was successful at implementing the same system of solitary confinement with labor. So, while the West are failed for their labor, East has a successful hard labor. They were forced to comply with work demands in an effort to instill self-discipline and healthy work habits into their characters. So, the difference between West and East is West failed their labor, but East was successful of implementing the system of solitary confinement with labor. They were forced to comply with work demands in an effort to instill self-discipline and healthy work habits into their characters. It is where convicts it is where convicts are very focused on their work, and they instill and give their best and became more disciplined to their characters and attitude. Weaving the works in the Eastern State Penitentiaries are weaving and shoemaking. Pennsylvania's prison system possessed the following attributes: isolation to foster penitence as a prisoner had time to reflect on his or her misdeeds; humanitarian based as it provided better food and health care; prisoners work alone to make goods and learn a trade. The focus moved from retribution to rehabilitation. So, what are the attributes of Pennsylvania system? So there are 5 attributes. First is the isolation, humanitarian, and prisoners are tasked to work to make goods and trade to another. Then the focus moved from retribution to rehabilitation. They did not focus on retribution but into the rehabilitation of convicts. Washburn and focus went from Pennsylvania's Eastern Penitentiary 1829 was intended to keep convicts separate even as they work. So even they were tasked as laborers, convicts are still separated. That is the Eastern Penitentiary. The Eastern was constructed on 1829, located on Cherry Hill on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Charles Dickens, a prominent foreign visitor to Eastern Penitentiary in 1842, concluded in his American Notes 1842 that the Pennsylvania's plan was cruel and wrong, saying he found this slow and daily tampering with the masteries of the brain to be immeasurably worse than any torture of the body. Even though the Pennsylvania system was good at labors, but Charles Dickens see it as a cruel and wrong act, because even though there were no torture, but it is more worse than torturing anybody because of the hard labor they tasked to the convicts. Prisoners were kept in solitary confinement in cells, an exercise yard, completely enclosed to prevent contact among prisoners. Prisoners saw no one except institution officers on an occasion. System spread until it predominated European prisons. The Pennsylvania system was superseded in the United States by the Auburn system. Convicts are confined in very solitary cells, and they don't see any other convicts, just the officers and the officers in cells and the warden. The end of an era. The Pennsylvania reforms brought overcrowding and increased cost. Eastern State officially abandoned the solitary confined system and operated as a congregate prison until it closed in 1970. The Pennsylvania system was ended in 1970 because of overcrowding. Next, the 5 deployment of prisoners. Different categories of prisoners shall be kept in separate institutions or parts of institutions taking account of their sex, age, criminal record, the legal reasons for their detention, and the necessities of their treatment. So the pre-trial prisoners must be housed separately from convict prisoners because they are not. Pre-trial prisoners must be separated from convict because convict prisoners are proven guilty, but pre-trial prisoners are not proven guilty yet, so they should be separate from convict prisoners. Should sleep alone in single cells. That's because of they are pre-trial prisoners, unless this is contrary to cultural norms. So they are be and should sleep alone in single cells because they are pre-trial prisoners. Protected prisoners. Prisoners who have been separated from the mainstream prisons population for their own protection can be accommodated in a similar prison design layout as the general population unless their physical or psychological needs dictate otherwise. The reason for the separation is usually to provide protection from other prisoners who may otherwise target them for abuse. So protected prisoners are also separated because they must be targeted by other prisoners. Oh, that's why they are protected and also separated in cell. Prisoners that have high self-harm and or suicidal tendencies should be accommodated in cells that have been designed without ligature points and standard glass windows to reduce the risk of self-harm through strangulation or cutting. So the prisoners who have suicidal tendencies must be accommodated in cell that no standard glass or windows that can cut any of their skins because they must use it for strangulation or cutting. There should be high visibility into the cells to enable prison staff to monitor such prisoners. So because they are high suicidal tendency prisoner, it must be sure that there are high visibility in that prison cell. There is officer in charge in that. Within a prison, secure units are designed to house prisoners who face a significant internal or external threat to their lives and need to be protected. Those who are a risk to escape and present a high security risk to the public. So it is prison within a prison is usually similar to protected prisons because they are secure. There are secure units that are assigned to they are assigned to protect them in case. Prisoners of war, a non-combatant, whether a military member, an irregular military fighter, or a civilian, who is held captive by belligerent power during or immediately after an armed conflict, must be housed separately from civilian prisoners and treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. So, prisoners of war is when a war conflict has happened in a country within a country, and when the other country had caught a member of the military of the other country, they they used them they used and they used and they used them to be put in jail, must be housed separately from civilian prisoners because it is from other countries, so they are separated. Women prisoners. Essential for men and women prisoners to be entirely separate from each other. Women are absolutely separated from a security point of view. Women should not have walked through areas that house men. Design and construction of accommodation for women prisoners may be different from male counterparts and may need to consider different functional needs. So, women prisoners are also separated for male prisoners because of their age, gender I mean, because of their gender. So that's why they must be separated. There are 5 level of prisoners, namely level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and level 5. So first one is the level 1, minimum security, dormitory, group showers, and toilets. This is where your typical non-violent and first-time offenders serve their sentences. So level 1 has the minimum security, dormitory, and group showers and toilets. So you can have group showers with the other prisoners, and because of non-violent and it is the first time offenders of the law. Level 2, medium security, dormitory, group showers, and toilets. Violent criminals could be classified from maximum security level from a maximum security level. So level 2 is the medium security because there are violent criminals that are there. So level 3, medium maximum security, 2-person cell block housing, close custody, controlled movement, houses inmates that have had no disciplinary infractions in the past 24 months, had to have served 20 years or more, offers vocational trades and program in reintegration programs. So level 3, it is the medium maximum security because of a very high violent convicts are there. So level 4, high maximum security, 2-person cell block housing, controlled movement, high security risk, and death row prisoners are housed here, typically reserved for high risk violent offenders and those that pose a flight risk. So level 4, it is where the very high security risk death row prisoners are housed. So like the prisoners and convicts that are ready for the death penalty, it is in level 4. They are assigned in level 4. This is level 5. Special unit housing or supermax, 1-person cell housing and 20 to 23 are locked down. His is the prison for the most or worst of the worst. Prisoners in this level housing range from 2 weeks to 14 years on his facility before they qualify for evaluation of classification level. So level 5, it is the very violent convicts are housed. So it is very risky. So it is in level 5. Forms of punishment. First is the incapacitation. Restriction of an individual's freedoms and liberties seeks to prevent future crime by physically moving criminals away from society. Examples of incapacitation are house arrest, incarceration, and death penalty are all forms of incapacitation. So in the first form of punishment is incapacitation. Incapacitation, it is where you are arrested and put in jail, or you must undergo death penalty or any other types of arrest. Next is the deterrence. Its goal is to persuade citizens and possible offenders or reoffenders to conform to the rules of law. First is the specific deterrence. Analyze how effective punishment is on an individual future behavior. Prevents crime by frightening an individual defendant with punishment. So, in order to to prevent any crime happens, they use it to frighten any convicts. General deterrence seeks to understand how individual punishment can deter others from committing crimes. Prevents crime by frightening the public with the punishment of an individual defendant. Third, marginal deterrence seeks to reconcile how effective different types of punishment are as either specific or general deterrence. 4. Partial deterrence refers to the situation in which the threat of penalty has some deterrent value even when someone engages in illegal behavior. For example, a criminal simply robbing a victim instead of also causing physical harm. So that's and retribution, one of the oldest forms of punishment, prevents crime by giving victims or society a certain sense of satisfaction that a defendant has been punished appropriately. It may be a judge ordering either a life sentence or the death penalty for someone after convicting. So, one of the very famous form of punishment is retribution, where the convicts undergo life sentence or death penalty. Rehabilitation focuses on helping criminals and prisoners overcome the barriers that lead them to committing criminal acts. Prevents future crime by altering a defendant's behavior. Includes developing occupational skills as well as resolving psychological issues such as drug addiction and aggression. Ultimate purpose is to transition offenders back into society. So rehabilitation it where convicts are treated well and they are tasked to make any work that can bring back the good attitude and to be ready to be released in the society again. Restoration. The goal of restoration is for the offender to make direct amends to both the victim and the community in which the crime was committed. Restorative justice, often used in crimes involving youth offenders, prevents future crime by punishing the defendant financially. It can be for physical injuries, loss of property or money, and early emotional distress. It is where convicts are tasked to pay the amount, the injuries, and the property they destroy, and also it is to direct amend to the both victim and the community where it is happened. So the age of enlightenment, also known as the Enlightenment, was a philosophical movement that dominated the world of ideas in Europe in the 18th century, centered on the idea that reason is the primary source of authority and legitimacy. This movement advocated such ideals as liberty, progress, tolerance, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church. Age of reason, when people began to value reason and rationality. Several ideas dominated Enlightenment thought, including rationalism, empiricism, and pragmatism, and cosmopolitanism. So it is the rationalism idea that humans are capable of using their faculty of reason to gain knowledge, the practice of only believing what is based on reason. Rationalism, from the word, it is believed from the reason of a certain person. Empiricism promotes the idea that knowledge comes from experience and observation of the world. Empiricism, it is where from the observation of your keen eyes and from the experience you get. Progressivism, the belief that through their powers of reason and observation, humans can make unlimited linear progress over time. This belief was especially important as a response to the carnage and upheaval of the English civil wars in the 17th century. Also, like in empiricism, but that believes in the reason and observation. The only difference are empiricism based on experience, while progressivism is based on observation. Cosmopolitanism reflected Enlightenment thinkers' view of themselves as actively engaged citizens of the world as opposed to provincial and close-minded individuals. the idea that all human beings are members of a single community. So cosmopolitanism, it is where based on community, so cosmopolitan. So that all human beings are members of a single community. It is also the actively of the opposed to provincial and close-minded individuals. So that is the cosmopolitan. Cesar Beccaria. So this is Cesar Benicia Marchis Marquez de Beccaria. Born on March 15, 1738 in Milan, Italy. Died November 28, 1794 in Italy. Known as the father of the classical criminology. Italian criminologists and economists who studied a Delpini on crimes and punishment. Was reserved and somewhat taciturn in his social contacts but placed great value in his personal and family relationship. At the age of 8, he was sent to the Jesuit school in Parma. So, also known as the father of classical criminology. So that is Cesar de Beccaria. Later described the education he received there as fanatical and stifling to the development of human feelings. Little in his student days gave indication of the remarkable intellectual achievements that were soon to follow. In 1758, he received a degree in law from the University of Pavia. So, according to him, the education he received was the development of human feelings. So, in his student days, he gave indication and remarkable intellectual achievements that he gained, and also received a degree of law in the University of Pavia. A member of the Academy Feast, most frequently referred to as a punishment reformer, advocated the principle of no crime without law. One of the first people to suggest that the essence of crime was the harm that it did to society. It is better to prevent crimes than to punish them. Deterrence, the idea that it is better to let a guilty man go free than to punish an innocent man. So that is the type and of person Beccaria is. So, according to him, it is better to prevent crimes than to punish them. So, crime prevention is the first typically motive of this. Believe that laws should be designed to preserve public safety and order, not to avenge crime. Deterrence employs the threat of punishment to influence behavior. It assumes that this principle of punishment became the hallmark of Beccaria's classical deterrence doctrine. So, from this, so Beccaria's principles are the classical deterrence doctrine, whereas deterrence employs the threat of punishment to influence the behavior of the convicts. Cesar Lombroso. Ezechia Marco Lombroso, the father of modern criminology, born on November 6, 1835 and died on October 19, 1909. Theory of the born criminal dominated thinking about criminal behavior in the late 19th and early 20th century. Under of the Italian school of positivist criminology, argued that criminality was inherited and that the born criminal could be identified by physical defects. So he is the first father of modern criminology. He is also the one that said that criminality was inherited, and he was under in the Italian school of positivist criminology. Studied medicine at the universities of Pavia, Padua, Vienna, and Genoa. Similar to Beccaria, he also studies on the University of Pavia. Interest in psychology and psychiatry merged with his study in psychology and anatomy of the brain, and ultimately lead to his anthropometric analysis of criminals. So, because of his study of psychology, he analyzed the thinking and behaviors of the convicts. William the Conqueror. Born on 1028 C. Palace, Normandy, France. Died September 9, 1087. Ruin. Duke of Normandy as William II from 1035 and King of England as William I from 1066. One of the greatest soldiers and rulers of the Middle Ages. Made himself the mightiest noble in France and changed the course of England's history by conquest of that country. So, he was William the Conqueror. He's the one of the greatest soldier and changed the England's history by conquering it. His weakness led to a breakdown of authority through the duchy. Private castles were erected, public power was usurped by lesser nobles, and private warfare broke out. Three of William's guardians died violent deaths before he grew up, and his tutor was murdered. His father's kin were of little help since most of them thought that they stood to gain by the boy's death. His mother managed to protect him through the most dangerous period. So, William the Conqueror suffered harsh treatment because the three guardians of William died with a violent death, and his tutor was murdered. So it was very sad situation of William the Conqueror. He also welcomed foreign monks and scholars to Normandy, including Lanfranc of Pavia. William endowed several monasteries in his duchy. He was a hunter and soldier, fierce and despotic, and generally feared. Uneducated, he had few graces, but was intelligent and shrewd, as soon obtained the respect of his rival. Even though William the Conqueror is uneducated, he was so intelligent that his enemies and rivals has a huge respect for him. Enrico Ferri. Born in Lombardy in 1856, died in 1929, having spent time as a student of Cesare Lombroso. So, Enrico Ferri was a student of Cesare Lombroso. Ferri focused more on social and economic influence on the criminal and crime rates. His research led to him postulating theories calling for crime prevention methods, became a founder of the Positivist school, was elected to Italian parliament in 1886. In 1893, he joined the Italian Socialist Party and edited their daily newspaper, De Avanti. So, Enrico Ferri was the student of Cesare Lombroso, and his theories for crime are the prevention methods to prevent crime in happening, and he became a founder of the Positivist school, and also he was elected in Italian Parliament in 1886, and became the editor of the newspaper in the Socialist Party in 1893. Clifford Shaw. Mr. Clifford Robb Shaw, born on 1895, died on 1957, was an American sociologist and criminologist, considered to be one of the most influential figures in American criminology. His work on juvenile delinquency with Henry D. McKay, conducted in the late 1920s, played a pivotal role in moving the study of such delinquency toward the discipline of sociology and away from psychology and psychiatry. Shaw and McKay's work spanned three general areas: studying geographic variation in the roots of juvenile delinquency, the study of autobiographical works by delinquents. Clifford Shaw was an American sociologist and criminologist. So, he is considered to be most of influential figures in American criminology because he is a criminologist, and they have three general areas of. First is the studying. So, social disorganization theory grew out of research conducted in Chicago by Shaw and McKay. crime tended to be concentrated in particular areas of the city. In neighborhoods with high crime rates, the rates remained relatively high, regardless of which racial or ethnic group happened to reside there at any particular time and previously. Crime-prone groups moved to lower crime areas of the city. The rate of criminal activity decreased accordingly to correspond with the lower rates of characteristic of that area. So that is the disorganization theory. So according to Shaw and McKay, crime tended to be concentrated in particular area. It is where the crime happened. For example, in Manila, it is a high, that community is a high quality crime happens there. So that is what the social disorganization theory tried to focus. These observations led Shaw and McKay to the conclusion that crime was likely a function of neighborhood dynamics and not necessarily a function of the individuals within neighborhoods. So, according to the observation of Shaw and McKay, crime was a function of neighborhood dynamics and not necessarily a function of individual within the neighborhoods. Lack of behavioral regulations. This system of delinquency attitudes could be easily learned by youths through their daily contact with older juveniles. So according to this, it is where the surroundings affects the little ones. When the young ones contact with other older juveniles that do illegal acts and crimes, so they inherit that because of the surrounding and environment they have. So that's all. Thank you.